This is not how technological dominance is supposed to work. A nation develops the surveillance systems that change modern warfare. Their equipment appears on the battlefields that define the drone age. Foreign militaries build entire operational doctrines around technology that carries Canadian design patents and Canadian engineering. The systems perform exactly as intended, delivering battlefield advantages that conventional forces cannot counter. And then that same nation purchases foreign drones for its own defense needs, while its domestic surveillance technology serves in conflicts on the other side of the world. The 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh War lasted 44 days. Armenian and Azerbaijani forces fought over disputed territory that had remained frozen in post-Soviet limbo for nearly 3 decades. The conflict was expected to follow familiar patterns of artillery duels, tank battles, and infantry advances across mountainous terrain. Instead, it became the first war where drone systems achieved total battlefield dominance against conventional military forces. Armenian air defense systems, some modern and recently acquired from Russia, proved almost completely ineffective against the drone swarms operating overhead. Tank columns were identified and destroyed before they could engage. Artillery positions were targeted within minutes of firing. Command posts were struck while commanders believed they were positioned safely behind front lines. The entire structure of conventional mechanized warfare collapsed under surveillance systems that could locate, track, and destroy targets faster than defensive measures could respond. The surveillance systems making this possible were manufactured by WESCAM, a Canadian company based in Ontario. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Turkish Bayraktar TB2 drones, the platforms that achieved such devastating effectiveness in Karabakh, carry WESCAM surveillance pods as their primary sensor systems. The high-resolution cameras, the infrared targeting systems, the laser designators that allowed precision strikes against Armenian positions were all Canadian technology. The battlefield revolution that defined modern drone warfare was enabled by equipment designed and produced in facilities less than an hour from Toronto. But when the Canadian government decided to acquire drone capabilities for Arctic surveillance and territorial defense, they did not turn to domestic manufacturers or Canadian surveillance technology. They announced plans to purchase American-made MQ-9 Reaper drones, the same platforms that the United States uses for operations in Middle Eastern deserts and African savannas. Systems designed for warm climates would be deployed to defend the coldest, most remote territory on Earth. The decision makes no operational sense. It only makes sense if you understand that Canadian defense procurement is not designed to maximize Canadian capabilities. It is designed to satisfy American expectations about alliance hierarchy. WESCAM technology did not begin with the Karabakh conflict. The company has been developing advanced surveillance systems since the 1970s. Their stabilized camera platforms were originally designed for television broadcast helicopters. The technology evolved into military applications as armed forces recognized that the same stabilization systems could transform aerial reconnaissance. By the 1990s, WESCAM systems were considered the global standard for airborne surveillance. American drones carried WESCAM sensors. European reconnaissance aircraft used WESCAM pods. Israeli defense companies integrated WESCAM technology into their platforms. The Canadian-designed systems appeared in conflicts across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Turkish defense planners recognized what this technology enabled. When Turkey began developing its domestic drone program in the early 2010s, they built the entire platform architecture around WESCAM surveillance capabilities. The TB2 drone was designed specifically to maximize the effectiveness of Canadian sensor systems. The result was a platform that could loiter for extended periods, identify targets at long range, and guide precision weapons with accuracy that made expensive manned aircraft unnecessary for most strike missions. And when Azerbaijan deployed these systems in 2020, they demonstrated that modern drone warfare had fundamentally changed the calculations of territorial conflict. Armenian forces were not technically inferior. They operated modern air defense systems, including Russian-made Tor and OSA platforms, designed specifically to counter aerial threats. But those systems were optimized for fast-moving aircraft and ballistic missiles. They were not designed to track and engaged numerous small drones operating at different altitudes while transmitting real-time targeting data. The surveillance advantage provided by WESCAM systems made Armenian defensive measures irrelevant. Azerbaijani operators could identify air defense radars the moment they activated, track their positions, and either avoid them or destroy them with anti-radiation weapons. Every defensive asset Armenia deployed became a target the moment it attempted to function. This was not superior numbers or better training. This was technological advantage so complete that conventional military force became obsolete. And the technology enabling this advantage was developed in Canada for purposes that had nothing to do with the South Caucasus or Turkish military ambitions. But here is where the paradox reveals the deeper pattern. While Turkish forces were demonstrating what Canadian surveillance technology could accomplish in modern warfare, Canadian defense planners were finalizing procurement decisions that ignored domestic capabilities entirely. The MQ-9 Reaper drone that Canada selected for Arctic operations was designed for counter-terrorism missions in desert environments. The platform operates effectively in the temperature ranges and weather conditions found in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen. It was never intended for Arctic deployment. The operational challenges are not subtle. Arctic temperatures regularly reach negative 40 degrees Celsius and below. At those temperatures, lubricants fail, batteries lose capacity, and composite materials become brittle. The MQ-9's satellite communication systems, which depend on GPS navigation and data links through American military satellites, become unreliable in polar regions, where satellite coverage is limited and atmospheric conditions interfere with signal transmission. More critically, the entire operational architecture of the MQ-9 assumes connection to American command and control networks. The drones cannot function independently of U.S. military infrastructure. Every flight requires authorization through systems controlled by the United States Air Force. Every mission generates data that flows to American servers. For Arctic sovereignty missions, where Canada may face disputes with the United States itself over shipping routes, resource rights, and territorial claims, this dependency is not a minor technical consideration. It means Canada would be using American-controlled systems to monitor American activities in contested areas where American and Canadian interests diverge. This is not a surveillance platform. This is permission to observe your own territory as long as foreign powers approve. The alternatives exist and have been demonstrated in conditions identical to Canadian requirements. Swedish defense companies developed drone systems specifically for Arctic operations. Those platforms use different materials that maintain flexibility in extreme cold. They employ alternative navigation systems that do not depend entirely on GPS satellites. They can operate from rough airstrips without the extensive ground support infrastructure that American drones require. More importantly, Swedish systems do not transmit operational data to foreign governments or require authorization from external powers to conduct missions. The surveillance capabilities remain under national control. Sweden would be eager to partner with Canada on Arctic drone development because they face similar operational requirements and similar concerns about maintaining sovereignty over remote northern territories. But Canadian procurement did not seriously evaluate Nordic alternatives. The decision framework was never about identifying the most capable systems for Canadian requirements. It was about selecting American platforms to demonstrate alliance commitment regardless of operational effectiveness. This reveals the essential contradiction in Canadian defense policy. The country produces surveillance technology sophisticated enough to change modern warfare. Canadian systems enable other nations to achieve battlefield dominance. But Canada itself operates under procurement frameworks that treat domestic capabilities as irrelevant and foreign dependency as inevitable. The economic implications are staggering. Every MQ-9 Reaper purchased from American manufacturers represents money leaving the Canadian economy, jobs not created in Canadian facilities, and technological capabilities not developed by Canadian engineers. The procurement spending that could build domestic defense industries instead subsidizes American companies while making Canada more dependent on systems it does not control. WESCAM itself represents what Canadian defense industry could become if procurement policy prioritized domestic development. The company employs hundreds of highly skilled workers in advanced manufacturing. Their technology appears on platforms operated by dozens of countries. The export revenue benefits the Canadian economy while establishing Canada as a leader in critical defense sectors. But this success occurred despite Canadian procurement policy rather than because of it. WESCAM built their market position by selling to foreign militaries who recognized the value of Canadian technology. The Canadian government itself was not a major customer. Now, as drone warfare becomes central to modern military operations, Canada faces a choice: invest in domestic capabilities and build on existing technological advantages, or continue purchasing foreign systems while Canadian technology serves in conflicts around the world. The current trajectory points toward continued foreign dependency. The MQ-9 procurement moves forward. Canadian Arctic surveillance will be conducted using American drones with American control systems, transmitting data to American servers. And WESCAM will continue selling sensors to Turkish, European, and Asian militaries who understand the technology's value better than Canadian defense planners. This is how technological leadership is surrendered without battle. Not through foreign conquest, but through domestic procurement decisions that treat sovereignty as negotiable and dependency as acceptable. The Karabakh precedent makes the stakes impossible to ignore. Armenian forces did not lose because they lacked courage or training. They lost because they could not counter surveillance systems that provided their opponents with complete battlefield awareness. Every position they occupied was visible. Every movement they made was tracked. Every asset they deployed became a target. Canadian Arctic defense faces potential adversaries with similar capabilities. Russian forces operate advanced drone systems. Chinese military planners study the same lessons from Karabakh that Turkish strategists applied. Any future conflict over Arctic territory or resources will be decided by surveillance capabilities and the ability to deny those capabilities to opponents. Operating drones that depend on American authorization in that environment is not a defense strategy. It is acceptance that Canada cannot defend its own territory without foreign permission. And the foreign power controlling those systems may have interests that diverge from Canadian sovereignty when disputes arise over Northwest Passage shipping rights or Arctic seabed resources. The pattern extends beyond drones to encompass the entire structure of Canadian defense policy. Fighter aircraft procurement prioritizes American systems, despite operational shortcomings for Arctic conditions. Naval systems are designed for interoperability with American fleets. Communications networks run through American satellites and American control stations. Every major defense capability depends on foreign infrastructure and foreign approval. The sovereignty required to actually defend Canadian territory has been replaced with permission to request defense from alliance partners whose interests may not align with Canadian priorities. WESCAM technology demonstrates that alternatives exist. Canadian engineering can produce systems that other nations consider essential for modern warfare. The capabilities exist domestically. The expertise is present. What is missing is procurement policy that treats Canadian sovereignty as worth defending through Canadian systems. The question is whether recognition of this pattern arrives before the dependencies become permanent. Drone systems purchased today will operate for decades. Once the integration with American networks is complete, and the training is standardized and the logistics chains are established, reversing course becomes economically and operationally impossible. By the time Canadian policymakers recognize that surveillance of Canadian territory should not require American approval, the capability to conduct independent surveillance will have been surrendered through procurement decisions that seemed technical rather than strategic. This is not how sovereignty ends dramatically. This is how it disappears through contract language and interoperability requirements and alliance management frameworks that make dependency permanent. The technology that changed warfare operates from Canadian facilities. The surveillance systems that achieved battlefield dominance were designed by Canadian engineers, but the country that produced those capabilities will defend its territory using foreign systems that require foreign authorization. History will record this as the moment when technological advantage was deliberately discarded in favor of subordination made permanent through procurement policy.